My student, she's like, I was checking on her and she said, I was just, writing about you. And I said, oh, I hope it was good. She said, it is. She said, we're reading about Aristotle. And the assignment is to write about a person that did something for you, like a person who did something for you and didn't expect anything in return. And so I was the person that she wrote about. And do you mind if I read what she posted on her?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Because it made me cry a little bit. She said, this woman owes me nothing. She pushed me to be better and better. When all the doors were closed in my face and people said no, she opened them up and made those people say yes. My principal, my mother figure.
Miss Albury is currently one of the executive directors for the Houston Independent School District. She just started that amazing position this school year, the 2023 school year. And the previous 7 years, she had the wonderful opportunity to work as a secondary principal at a phenomenal school called the Young Women's Leadership Academy, which is in the Fort Worth Independent School District. She was there for 7 years, and we're going to really get into that. And that's a phenomenal school that's in the top 1% of schools in the entire United States. And so this wasn't an easy decision, I'm sure, for Miss Albury to transition to Houston ISD as an executive director, but we're super excited to have that conversation with her. So Miss Albury, thank you so much for coming on the show. What's going on in your life in your K-12 career right now?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. I'm just really excited to be here and amongst just, you, my friend that I've met, coming down to Houston. Sorry, Freudian slip. Right now, I am an executive director. And so basically because, it's so funny to transition from being a principal, where if you tell someone you're a principal, they know what you do, to telling someone you're an executive director. And they're like, oh, what is that? Right. And so basically it's a principal supervisor and a principal coach. And really, I always wanted to help others just build their capacity as leaders. And so in this role, I had that opportunity to build the capacity of leaders that impact even more children than students that were just on my campus.
That's awesome. So how has the transition been? Like you said, obviously you're used to being the queen of the castle, for lack of a better term. You have your own school. And in your case, it's a middle and a high school. So you're an entire secondary school from 6 through 12 to now you are actually almost like a guest coming into other buildings where there's already a principal in place. How does that look?
God has a sense of humor. And what I can say is, as a principal, I'm sure I was not the easiest person to manage, because I knew what I was doing. And if, you didn't align, it just, I was a little subversive, if you will. My principals aren't that way, but I take into account that that's who I was as a leader. Okay. And so really giving them credence and for their work and what they do and what they bring and their competence as leaders, and seeing how I can fit in there to make them even better leaders, but they're already great leaders as is. And so I'm blessed in that capacity. But because I knew how I was as a leader, that sort of guides how I lead.
Okay.
Right. And I think a lot of times, people may come in and sort of not give people the value that they have as being a leader,
Sure.
And then you want to kind of explain things that they've already been doing. And, so first kind of coming in, doing a listening tour to see where their needs are, where their opportunities are. And the reality is that kind of what you said, as a building principal, the buck stops with you. The no stops with you. The yes stops with you at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
And so when you're coming into a school, the buck doesn't stop with you. And so really it's about building that trust with that leader, so that they believe in you and what you're doing and what you're there to do to help them be a better leader, if that makes sense.
No,
And
that makes a lot of sense.
And so going back to, I had a role one time where I had a lot of responsibility, but not a lot of authority. Right.
Ooh, okay.
I was an AP coordinator, and I was supposed to get all of these AP audits done or whatever it was. And so I went to the teachers to try to get them done, and some people didn't have them done. And I remembered this conversation with one of these teachers because it really impacted me. And he said, at the end of the day, you're the last person I have to listen to in this
Wow.
building. Right?
He actually said
And
that to you.
He was right. I wasn't his evaluator. I was, at the end of the day, I'm a coordinator and I'm the last person he has to listen to. And so even though I evaluate my principals, I take that into consideration because instead of, people will say will and skill, but I always say want and skill because will is just compliance, want is passion.
Ooh, I like that.
So I just don't want you being compliant with what I say, right? I want you to internalize it and become part of your passion. So part of that is really making sure that I have that relationship with my principals, that I listen to them, that I hear them, right? And that we're in the work together and that I value them because the principalship is so lonely. And having been a pandemic principal, that I think was the most underappreciated role by anybody, right?
Yeah.
And I remember, not to just to veer off the conversation, but I remember as a principal, and I remember the day, it was April 30th, 2020. And the pandemic had started in March, and we were on 24-hour call, and we were managing situations that really we weren't prepared to manage and create opportunities for students and manage the health of a building and all those things. And April 30th, 2020, at 5. So for a whole month, we were on call. We were silenced because where teachers were able to speak out about how they felt. That was not where we sat, right? We had to do what we were told. We had to. So it and not knowing, and then also managing your own personal lives. April 30th at 5:45, an email came out that said tomorrow's Principal's Day. Happy Principal's Day.
Wow.
It was a Friday. And I remember that because in that instance, first of all, we were afterthought, right? The value of being a principal in that role and all the things that we had to manage was so undervalued that you didn't even take the time to wish us happy, to really celebrate us in our work. But the next week was Teacher Appreciation Week. And if we ever did that to our teachers, right, it would just be. And so that I just remember that being so, obviously you can tell 3 years later, like there are pivotal moments that really it's a very underappreciated job with a lot of responsibility that is very lonely and siloed. And so kind of I am very much so autobiographical in my leadership as well. And so knowing that, I try to also be a thought partner for my principals and let them know they are not in it alone.
That's powerful.
Build collegiality and things like that. So
no, that's really, really powerful. I would definitely love for you to be my principal supervisor. That would be really cool because you bring that lens of having sat in that seat before and really being, empathetic about the challenges that principals make. So I'm sure your principals love you very much.
My principals very much.
Yeah, that's cool. But let's go back to the beginning. Did you always want to be a K-12 educator?
Never wanted to be a teacher. I never wanted to be an educator. I wanted to work for the Foreign Service.
Okay.
I minored in Russian, and I just really wanted to work in an embassy and, live the fabulous life, if you will. However, I majored in sociology, which looks lovely on my wall, framed. However, when it came time to getting a job, it's not as valuable. But what I would say is my sociology degree, I use it every day. I use it in all that I do. But at the time, it wasn't as lucrative career-wise. And having, I did 2 terms abroad. I did term abroad in East Africa, and I did term abroad in Brazil. And so I saw abject poverty and oppression really at its worst in a lot of places. Oppression of women, oppression of people, just poverty, like true poverty.
And people that look like us too, right?
People that look like us, yes. And so from that, being a sociology major, I decided that I really wanted to be impactful, right? I just wanted to make a difference. And then I heard Jesse Jackson speak that we have to level the education playing field from the Mississippi Delta to Wall Street to end oppression and racism. And so
Mm,
I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to,
okay. Hmm.
so upstate New York, packed my little bag, never been to
Wow.
Mississippi. And I found a program online through Ole Miss, Mississippi Teacher Corps, where
Okay.
you teach 2 years in the Mississippi Delta and you get your master's degree for free. So
Wow. Okay.
that's, yeah, so that's what I did. So I moved from upstate New York to Tunica, Mississippi, which if you ever read Jonathan Coleswell Savage Inequalities, it's
Hmm.
in that book. And at the
Okay.
time, it was the poorest county in the country.
Wow.
So that's where I got my, my start as a high
Hmm.
school teacher,
Wow.
22. And I was there for 3 years, taught history, social studies, high school social studies. And then a friend of mine that I met in the program
Hmm.
was in Fort Worth and said, you need to come to Fort Worth. It's great. And I had never heard, I mean, I'm from upstate New York, right? So Texas really was a foreign country. I had
Sure.
watched King of the Hill. I had watched Dynasty,
Yeah.
like I'm a little, Dallas, rather the show Dallas. I'm real
Sure.
limited in my experience, but I was like, okay, in your 20s, you make those kinds of things,
Sure.
those decisions. And I moved to Fort Worth. I was in Fort Worth for a little over 20 years. And so, but one of the premise that has always guided my career was impact,
Okay.
right? I've turned down several opportunities previously because I didn't see the impact that I would be making.
Okay.
And that was really important to me, that the idea that if I'm not there, I make a difference, right? And so me
Right.
not being there would impact what happens for students. And so I went to Fort Worth. I taught middle school for a while. Then I moved on to be a academic coordinator, AP coordinator,
Okay.
dealing with college readiness, helping students get scholarships for college and, the whole AP program, College Board. Then I was a gifted and talented specialist
Wow.
for a year. And then I was
Okay.
assistant principal for 3 years at a low performing school.
Hmm.
And then, God's plan. I always say that, right? Like
Yeah.
it's what he wants. It's not what you want. It's what
That's
he wants
true.
when he wants it. So then after 3 years of being an assistant principal, I got the role of principal at Young Women's Leadership Academy. And
Wow.
so that was a huge undertaking because I had only been a assistant principal for 3 years, right?
Right.
There are a lot of people who've been assistant principals for years before they're principals. And so, but I think that really all of my experiences from Brazil to Mississippi to how I was brought up by my mother, all of those contributed to my vision for my school.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
And my mother was an educator as well. She was blind. And but she taught first grade. She actually had an assistant that helped her because she was legally blind.
Wow. Okay.
And she was a single parent, divorced, single parent. And so she always tried to make sure I had certain experiences in life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up going to which circles back, but I ended up going to a small liberal arts school in New York with a
Okay.
lot of people who went to boarding school in New England.
Mhm.
So that's a totally different level of wealth
Oh, yeah.
and
Oh, yeah.
navigating that space. And so when I became principal of YWLA, understanding those experiences firsthand, that helped me design what I wanted for my students so that they were able to not grow up and not just, people say seat at the table.
Yeah.
But one thing that I noticed is you can still have a seat at the table and not have a voice. You can still be in the room and not be heard.
Mm.
But if you're leading the table, people have no choice but to hear what you have to say. So it's not just about them sitting at tables that have been traditionally created for them to not exist at, but how
Mhm.
are we giving them the skills to lead those tables? Because that's a totally different ball game,
Yeah,
right?
you're
And
so right.
so that was my vision for my school, is that people don't define you. And I would always say this because we were the gems. That was our mascot.
Oh, okay.
And I would say, heat, time, and pressure are what make diamonds. And when you think about a diamond starts off as coal, right? It
Mm-hmm.
has value, but it's very fragile.
Mm.
But heat, time, and pressure make sure that that piece of coal becomes a diamond. And,
Yes.
life will cut you, but when you're a diamond, the more cuts you have, the more brilliant you shine. And
Woo.
so,
That's powerful.
so
That's
there
powerful.
there are all those kinds of things because I think a lot of times people, it's all in how you look at things, right? And I
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
think, for my students, they came from a lot of different places. And what I always wanted for them is I never wanted anyone to look at them as Title I kids. So they had to wear the uniform and those saddle shoes that they hated and that plaid skirt, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
when they would step off buses and when they would go to luncheons and things like that, the way people looked at them, because that's not what they expected, my kids deserve that. And that's what I
Absolutely.
sort of always fought for, um, in that regard, as well as academics, because it's the social piece. And I think in education, we miss that social piece and we just focus on the academics.
Sure.
But the academics and the resume get you the interview, but your social skills get you the job.
That's
So,
powerful. That's so
um,
true.
and so that always was my vision. And that's why I say, so now it's very different because I'm not crafting the vision. And so
Yeah.
I'm operating in someone else's vision. So it is very different. And I would definitely like to transition to crafting the vision as soon as I possibly can. So
Okay. Okay.
when you talk about future plans, I would love to be a superintendent. I would
Oh,
love to,
excellent.
move up that piece of it because I think even though I know in some places it is more of a political role, I think it really is about expectations. And a
True.
lot of times, even in the best intents that we have, our expectations tend to be lower than what
Oh,
they
that's
should
real.
be.
That's real. That's powerful. And you actually answered one of my questions. Like I definitely see you as a superintendent one day. So I'm glad that that's part of your plan because I have no doubt that that's going to happen for you, probably sooner rather than later. But right now you are in a school district that's really going through a lot of reforms as well. How's that going?
I think it's, with transition, right?
Mhm.
It's hard for a lot of people and change. The only constant is change.
Sure.
And I think that in my role, part of my role really is helping people to manage change at a rate that they can handle. And I think the thing too is helping my leaders manage change and help them be able to process the change for the people underneath them.
Right. Right.
That's
Yeah. And I
part of
think
leadership. Mhm.
that's true. And I think also the fact that you've had that experience, obviously, for many years as a principal is helping them to make that transition as well. Because I would have to believe that YWLA is a much different place now than it was when you first got there, right?
And it's funny because when I first got there, we had just gotten a blue ribbon, so it was a solid school. But I remember saying, I need to make my mark. Like I need to
Mhm.
make my mark. Like I'm not gonna, because you can get in a job that is a decent school and coast, but that's
Yeah,
not who I am.
I can tell.
Talking to my ED at the time, and I said, we're going to be on U.S. News and World Report. We're going to get on that list. And he said, that's not for you. That's for the school down the street.
What?
And I said, you don't know me. you must, you
Mm.
must not have met me. And so what I did was I pulled up the list, U.S. News and World Report. I found in Dallas at the number one school at the time in the country was in Dallas. I cold called him and I said, can I come see you? Because I need to know what you're doing.
The blueprint.
And yes, exactly. I need to see so I can incorporate those things. And we didn't make the list that year because our first graduating class was in 2016. So we didn't make the list until I think 2018 was when it was. But when we hit the list, we were at 798. And within like 2-3 years, we went from 798 to 86.
Wow, that's amazing. Good for you.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing that you did that. And I would have to believe that you still keep in contact with a lot of the graduates from your school. Can you share a couple of stories of, some successes?
So I just a text message I got the other day. I was side checking on them, sending text messages, and my student, she's like, I was checking on her, and she said, I was just, writing about you. And I said, oh, I hope
Mm.
it was good. She said, it is. She said, it's we're reading about Aristotle, and the assignment is to write about a person that did something for you, like a person who did something for you and didn't expect anything in return. And so I was the person that she wrote about. And do you mind if I read what she posted on her?
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely, please.
Because it made me cry a little bit. She said, this woman owes me nothing. She pushed me to be better and better. When all the doors were closed in my face and people said no, she opened them up and made those people say yes. My principal, my mother figure. I love you so much.
Wow. I know that had to bring
Okay.
a tear to your eye. Oh my God, that's so powerful. So those kind of letters are priceless, right? This is a profession, and yeah, we do it because we have to, make a living and feed our families and all that. But you can't put a dollar sign on that. Like you'll have that 30 years from now,
I
right?
keep all their, yes, I keep all their letters. I
That
do.
is
I
so
do.
powerful, so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Ooh.
Yeah. And I know, and that's something that that's that's my why, right? Like
Mm,
that was my why right there. That you and kids don't always see what you do for them. And so the fact that she's able to recognize it, you
right.
know, was very powerful. Another story that I had is my first year teaching.
Okay.
So my first year teaching,
Tunica,
22
Mississippi.
Mississippi,
Yeah.
Tunica, Mississippi. I'm teaching Mississippi studies. I have no idea anything about Mississippi studies, okay?
Yeah.
Even less than Texas at the time. And I had a student in my class, and he was disruptive. He was 18-year-old ninth grader.
Wow.
Disruptive, extremely. Now, mind you, I'm 22. Like it was anyway, but very disruptive. And every time I would teach, he would be that one person off task. He would be that person that, just would just derail the whole lesson.
Sure.
And one day I was in the community and I was speaking to a community member, and I was saying about who I had in my class and things like that. And she had worked in the department, the education department for the district. And I mentioned his name, and she said, the school system failed him. He can't read. And that really hit me because the next day, when I'm instructing and at a point in time I had them read, and I saw him physically shut down, close the book, and totally disconnect from the classroom and the instruction and things like that. And I was like, wow. I mean, obviously, I was a brand new teacher. I wouldn't necessarily caught that. But the
Sure.
fact that she told me that, I could see where in my instruction now he became disruptive. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so the next day he was in the hall because he was often kicked out of class.
Yeah.
And he was in the hall, and I was on my planning period, and I brought him in the classroom, and I had class the next period with him, and I reviewed the entire lesson orally with him
Mm-hmm.
from beginning to end. I didn't tell him why I was doing it, but I was like, hey, and the entire lesson in that next period, he was on point. He was
Wow.
contributing. I mean, to the point that the other students were like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
But what that did for me really was to begin always thinking about the why, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't that he wasn't intelligent, it was that he didn't have the tools to really maximize that intelligence. And
Sure.
I'm sure a lot of people passed him off and didn't take the time to see what exactly he needed to be successful. He went on to get his GED. He
Okay.
ended up
Good
dropping
for
out.
him.
And he went on to
Mm.
get his GED. But I think a lot of times, right, like you have to love the unlovable
Powerful.
and really think about how you can support them in their potential. And so that was over 20 years, that's still imprinted on me just as an educator, how it really is important. Sometimes, actions are reactions to something, and you need to find out the root cause,
Sure.
because that's our job to really make sure that our students have what they need to be successful. And sometimes it might not look the way that it's supposed to look,
Sure.
right? But at the end of the day, you want to build healthy children into adults, not broken adults.
That's fair. How does that saying go? It's much easier to bring up healthy children than to repair broken men. You know what I
Yep.
mean? And
Yep.
it's so powerful and it's so true, right? Like even when you think about the fact that you were over a 612 school, like if there were students that, at like this young man in ninth grade can't read, it's much easier to help that student when they were 9 instead of in ninth grade, right? Like
Yes.
that's just real, right? And so a lot of times they don't get that foundation that they need to be successful. And then we wonder why, because they're going to act out. They're not going to look bad in front of their peers. Like they're just not, right? And so the greatest pressure for our young people is peer pressure. And if they have not got what they need in the elementary level and then they get to the middle and high school level and they can't read, like reading is something you should know by the end of your third grade year, fourth grade year at the max. And if you don't have that, then the curriculum fundamentally changes anyway. It changes from learning to read to reading to learn. And if you didn't learn to read, how can you read to learn, right? And so to me, that's super powerful what you're sharing because we have to, in my opinion, as a country, do a much better job of educating our young people at the elementary level, right? And making sure that they have the foundation, the solid foundation that they need so that when they do matriculate to the middle and high school level, it's not a problem. They're okay, right? So, yeah, thank you for sharing that.
I think, too, one of the things that was really important to me as a leader, making sure that the experiences for my students, that they saw themselves in them,
Mm,
right? I think being a Black woman and being a principal, I think it was beneficial to all of my children, right? Because it allowed my children who didn't look like me per se to see that, leaders look differently, right?
it's true.
And then for my children that look like me, that, hey, I can grow up and be her, right?
Oh,
And
that's
so
so powerful. Yeah,
it was
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
was it was beneficial. But one of the things I definitely did that I didn't get growing up, I made sure that my students, when we would read literature, that the books looked like them. So instead of even having male protagonists, there were female protagonists, right?
I
There
like
were
that.
female women of color, so that they could never say that they went through school like I did and never read a book where they were represented. I always thought about my nevers. I never, and
Yeah.
I tried to make sure that that was not a reality for my students. And even though it was an all girls school, my thing is not women are better, but we need equal opportunities, right? We're equal.
100%.
Was definitely, and building, to your point, healthy women. So we would have like donuts with dads. And at one point throughout Donuts with Dads, I would have the dads turn to their daughters and tell them why they love them and why they're proud of them. And then the daughters tell the fathers, because I never wanted my kids to say, my dad never told me he loved me, or my dad never told me he was proud of me. And we would do
Yeah.
that with the mothers as well, because, you hear people say that, like, no one ever told me that they love me, or no
Yeah.
one. So and then you would see all the tears, of the
Mhm.
dads and of the moms, because to
Yeah.
take that moment. And so I think that's why that role was such a passion for me, because it was my opportunity to really repair all the social ills and prepare them to be able to navigate a society that might not have been designed for their success, whether because they were women of color in poverty, women in poverty, right?
Yes.
That was sort of, yeah. So I'm sorry, I just,
No, that's really powerful. I agree. I think, that's not done enough, right? Like we need to make sure that what we're teaching our young people is culturally relevant. We need to make sure that it's relevant as far as gender. And we don't do enough of that. So I appreciate you bringing that up because I don't truthfully think that's done well. And I think that needs to be done more and there needs to be a greater emphasis on that so that, like you said, our students can truly relate to what's being taught to them. And you have to make that connection in order for them to really buy in. Thank you for sharing that. So if you had to go all the way back to the beginning, when you were at that small liberal arts college, would you still have made the decision to ultimately get into K-12 education?
yes,
Okay.
because
You
of
you
the
paused a
impact.
little bit. Talk to
I
me.
did.
Talk to me
I did.
about that.
I would have gotten into education. I think that I would have maybe ensured that I had also built other skills as well.
Okay, that's fair. But you had a lot of skills.
financially.
I mean, I know you said you speak Russian. You went to Brazil,
Yes.
so I'm sure you had to have some Portuguese in there a little bit. And,
But I
like,
mean, but I think, like, it's so funny because when I started teaching, I made $28,000, and that was high.
yeah, I made 19 when I
So,
started. So you're right. That was high.
so it's like now it's like, when you see what people start making as teachers, I'm like, that was nowhere near. So, and my yes is because definitely, my no are very selfish.
Sure. Okay.
My yes is the altruistic part of me, is that was my purpose, and I know that was my purpose because of the way I was allowed to shine, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so the ability that no's were not really no's, and I was able to really just realize that and shine my brightest. That's why I know that that's where I was supposed to be. And when I
Yeah.
say selfishly, like financially, you know
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
things that
Yeah.
went with it. But I think, like when I think about the lives that I've impacted, the children that I've impacted, whether or not they realize it or not, the experiences that my students have had. They went to see Hamilton one year. We took 2 grades to go
Oh,
see Hamilton.
wow.
And, we had Nancy Pelosi come in our cafeteria. I got a chance to interview her. So they got a chance to meet the speaker. And some of our students got the opportunity to meet Michelle Obama, and really giving them life altering opportunities,
Yeah.
right? Like I really impacted a lot of lives. And I love that aspect of it, right? Like I love the fact that, I can say because of me, they were able to,
Absolutely.
or because God put me there to do
Sure.
that for them, I was able to, right?
You were
The
that
other
vessel.
piece of it, yeah, yes. And, it's a calling, and I answered it. It's
Yes.
definitely a calling.
Yeah. 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 For
It's a
sure. Yeah.
calling. Yeah. So,
That's really cool. Wow. So I'm super grateful that you came on the show. And obviously we met, about 3 or 4 months ago. And that's what I love about this show. I started this show because I wanted to make sure people like you that are making an impact in our K-12 profession get their flowers. And even, we've had conversations in the past, but I didn't even know some of the things you're sharing with me. I mean, this is just super powerful. And I know that a lot of our viewers and listeners are going to get a lot of value out of what you're sharing. So, I definitely want to thank you for coming on the show and, just kind of sharing your story, sharing your journey with our viewers and our listeners. But before you leave, can you please just share some parting words of wisdom? Tell us how we can connect with you, and then we'll say goodbye.
sure. Um, as an educator, you're saying,
It's totally up to you. I mean, you can, there's people out there that are listening to you that might be thinking about getting into the profession, but there might be people that are listening to you and saying, I'm done. I'm ready to throw in the towel. So, like, you know what I'm saying? It's both ends of the spectrum, right? You never know.
one thing I would definitely say is that, since the pandemic, I think the challenge to educators has been that they haven't found their passion. They lost their passion, and things that used to feed their passion no longer feed their passion. But I
Yeah,
think it's important to note that educators and teachers, we're the profession that creates everyone else.
100%.
Right? And so it's important that the future generation, they have people in front of them that see their value and really realize that potential to really have a productive, future for the society and things like that. And though there are a lot of challenges, and the profession has definitely changed, it and continues to change with technology and a variety of things. It's really understanding that sometimes you are that person. You are that person that sparks that passion in students. And
Yeah.
so really understand your worth. Understand
Yes.
your worth for those that are in front of you, and understand your worth for the people that you impact. And at the end of the day, really always tapping into your why is important.
Yes.
Um, to be constantly reminded about why you're there, and what your role is in that capacity.
Awesome. Well said. How can we connect with you?
Sure. Gmail.
Okay.
uh, Albury T 1976 at gmail.com, or also on LinkedIn.
Sure.
Yes. Also on Instagram, it's Madam Principal. So that's a funny story really quickly. So when Nancy Pelosi came to our school, she was in our library, and there was all this pomp and circumstance. And I went up to her and I said, well, hello, Madam Speaker. And she said, hello, Madam Principal. And I said, oh.
Wow.
And at the time, she was the most powerful woman in America. And I was like, she called me Madam Principal. So I will forever be Madam Principal.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's really cool.
Yes.
Well, I wish you all the best. I just see greatness within you. I'm just being honest with you. I'm just going to speak that out into existence in this universe. And I have no doubt that every goal that you have for yourself, whether it be to continue on this path as a district leader and ultimately become a superintendent, maybe even, maybe you will become Madam Secretary of Education. You never know.
I wouldn't mind that.
You never know. I don't put any limits on God in the universe. So I wish you all the best. And thank you so much for coming on the show. The only request that I would ask for you is when you become a superintendent, please come back on the show.
I would love that.
Thank you so much. We wish you all the best, and may God richly bless you as you continue forward in your career. Thank you so much.
Thank you.